For years, people watched my life on television and thought they knew everything about me. They saw smiles, they saw faith, they saw a perfect family. But there were rules you never saw, questions I was taught not to ask, feelings I was trained to silence. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about what I was taught to hide it and why staying quiet was never really a choice. I grew up believing silence was a form of goodness, not because anyone said it out loud, but because it was rewarded. If something felt uncomfortable, we prayed. If something hurt, we endured. And if a question didn't fit, we learned not to ask it from the outside. Everything looked certain. Clear rules, clear answers, clear expectations. But inside, I carried thoughts I didn't know how to name. I didn't learn how to use my voice. I learned how to manage it. I learned when to speak and when staying quiet kept things easier. I learned that being agreeable meant being safe. And being safe meant not disrupting the structure around me. What people didn't see, what cameras never showed, was how early that lesson begins. You don't decide to be silent one day. You absorb it slowly. You notice who is praised. You notice who is corrected. You notice how quickly discomfort is redirected into faith or gratitude. So you adjust. You tell yourself it's normal, that you're just sensitive. That understanding everything isn't necessary. And eventually, you stop listening to yourself. For a long time, I thought peace meant no conflict. I thought faith meant no questions, meant compliance. But silence like that doesn't bring peace. It creates distance from yourself. There were moments when my body reacted before my thoughts did. Tight chest, that instinct to pull back before speaking, that wasn't weakness, that was conditioning. Change didn't start loudly for me. It started with noticing, with admitting, quietly, that some things didn't feel right. Not because I rejected where I came from, but because I finally allowed myself to be honest about it. And that's where this story really begins. When you grow up in a place where everything is defined for you, you don't realize how small your world is until you step just slightly outside of it. For me, that step didn't come from rebellion, it came from exhaustion. I was tired of feeling tense over simple thoughts, tired of measuring every feeling before I allowed myself to feel it, tired of asking myself, instead of, is this true? I didn't question my faith at first. I questioned myself. Why did certain conversations make my chest tighten? Why did silence feel safer than honesty? Why did peace feel conditional? I didn't have answers, but I noticed patterns. I noticed how often I minimized my own discomfort, how quickly I dismissed feelings by calling them weakness, how easily I accepted guilt even when I didn't know what I had done wrong. That's when I realized something unsettling. I had learned to confuse obedience with self-worth. If I was agreeable, I felt valuable. If I stayed quiet, I felt secure. If I followed expectations, I felt accepted. But the moment I slowed down, the moment I allowed myself space to think, that system stopped working. Not dramatically, just quietly. I didn't feel rebellious. I felt aware. And awareness is dangerous in systems that depend on silence. I started noticing how often my own needs came last, how rarely I asked myself what I wanted, how normal it felt to disappear emotionally while still showing up physically. That's when I understood the change had already started, not on the outside, but inside me. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Once awareness settles in, fear usually follows. Not loud fear, not panic, but a quiet, persistent fear that asks, What happens if I don't fit anymore? Because when your identity is built inside a structure, stepping outside, even emotionally, feels like risk. I wasn't afraid of change itself. I was afraid of what change might cost me. Belonging, approval, stability. I had been taught that certainty was safety, that doubt was dangerous, that questioning meant you were drifting. So every time a new thought surfaced, I felt guilt before curiosity. Not because the thought was wrong, but because I wasn't supposed to have it. That's the part people don't understand. You don't need someone to tell you not to think. If you're trained well enough, you'll police yourself. I replayed conversations in my head, filtered words before they ever left my mouth, measured my reactions just to make sure they stayed acceptable. And the hardest part was this. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. I was still present, still smiling, still participating. But internally, I was negotiating with myself every day. How much honesty is too much? How much of myself is safe to show? How far can I grow without being seen as a problem? That constant self-monitoring is exhausting. It drains you quietly. And over time, it creates distance, not just from others, but from yourself. That's when I realized something important. Staying the same wasn't actually protecting me anymore. It was costing me. And once that truth settles in, fear starts to shift. It doesn't disappear, but it stops being the loudest voice. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where everything suddenly made sense. It happened in pieces. Small realizations that didn't feel dramatic, but refused to go away. I began to notice how often my instincts were dismissed, not by others, but by me. How quickly I talked myself out of discomfort because it was easier than sitting with it. For years, I had been taught to trust authority before intuition, to follow structure before self, to believe that clarity came from outside, not within. But something inside me kept asking quieter questions. Why does peace feel fragile? Why does honesty feel risky? Why does belonging feel conditional? Those questions didn't demand answers. They demanded attention. I didn't announce this shift. I didn't explain it to anyone. I barely admitted it to myself. But once you start paying attention, your internal world becomes harder to ignore. Came from pressure, not desire. How often my no felt like something I had to justify. How often I carried responsibility for things that were never mine to carry. That awareness changed how I moved through everyday moments. I started pausing before agreeing, listening before responding, letting silence exist without filling it with reassurance. It felt uncomfortable, but it also felt honest. And for the first time, honesty didn't feel like disobedience. It felt like alignment. Setting boundaries didn't feel empowering at first. It felt wrong. Not because I didn't need them, but because I had never been taught that I was allowed to have them. Every boundary came with guilt attached. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for disappointing someone. Guilt for choosing myself in ways I had never chosen before. I worried constantly about how my choices would be interpreted. Would they think I was pulling away? Would they see this as rejection? Would silence be misunderstood as anger? So I over-explained. I softened my words. I tried to make my boundaries sound temporary, reasonable, harmless. But boundaries don't work when they need approval. The hardest part wasn't saying no. It was tolerating the discomfort that followed the pause, the lack of reassurance, the absence of immediate understanding. I had been conditioned to believe that love required access, That closeness meant availability. That saying yes proved loyalty. So when I began protecting my time and energy, it felt like I was breaking an unspoken rule. But something unexpected happened. The more I honored my boundaries, the clearer my thoughts became, the quieter my anxiety felt. And the more I trusted myself, I realized that guilt isn't always a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign you're doing something new. And choosing yourself, especially when you've never been allowed to, can feel like loss before it feels like freedom. But it is still freedom. Healing didn't come the way I expected it to. It didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as honesty. At first, therapy felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, not because it challenged my beliefs, but because it asked me to notice myself. For the first time, someone wasn't telling me what was right. They were asking me what felt true. That question stayed with me. I realized how rarely I had checked in with my own emotions, how quickly I dismissed stress as weakness, how often I confused endurance with strength. Healing required me to slow down, to sit with feelings I used to rush past, to name things I once avoided naming, and that was harder than staying silent, because silence had rules. Healing did not. I had to learn that feeling angry didn't make me ungrateful. That feeling hurt didn't mean I lacked faith. That questioning didn't equal rejection. I learned that my nervous system had been on alert for years, trained to anticipate correction, not care. As I understood that, something softened inside me. I stopped measuring progress by how calm I appeared. I started measuring it by how honest I felt. Healing didn't erase the past, but it gave me language for it. And once you have language, you no longer have to carry everything alone. As I changed, distance followed, but not the kind people imagine. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rejection. It was space. Space to think without explaining. Space to feel without defending. Space to exist without performing a version of myself that felt safe for others. I didn't announce this distance. I didn't label it. I simply stopped forcing closeness where honesty didn't fit. That choice was misunderstood. Quiet change often is. People expect transformation to be loud. They expect statements, lines drawn, doors slammed shut. But my change didn't look like that. It looked like restraint, like choosing not to argue, like letting people believe what they wanted to believe. For a long time, I thought distance meant loss, that stepping back meant breaking something. But distance can also be protection. It can mean preserving relationships by not asking them to carry weight they can't hold. I learned that you don't owe everyone access to your growth. Some journeys are meant to be walked privately, and that doesn't make them less real. It makes them sustainable. I didn't walk away loudly. I walked forward quietly, and that difference matters. I used to think freedom came from being understood, from explaining myself clearly enough that no one would be disappointed. But freedom didn't come that way. It came the moment I stopped explaining, not because I didn't care, but because I finally trusted myself enough to live without constant validation. I didn't lose my faith. I didn't erase my past, and I didn't turn my story into a fight. I chose something quieter. I chose honesty over approval, peace over performance, and growth that didn't require an audience. Some people will always want a version of me that stayed the same. That's understandable. Change can feel threatening to those who knew you before you knew yourself. But growth doesn't need permission, and silence doesn't always mean fear. Sometimes it means clarity. If this story feels familiar, If you've ever felt torn between belonging and truth, know this. You're allowed to grow without burning bridges. You're allowed to heal without making announcements. And you're allowed to choose a life that feels aligned, even if it looks quiet from the outside. That's the truth I learned, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. And that honesty changed everything. With distance came clarity, but also loneliness, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that settles in when familiar patterns change. I noticed how different my days felt: quieter, less reactive, but also less predictable. I wasn't constantly bracing myself anymore, and that freedom felt unfamiliar. When you've lived in survival mode for a long time, peace can feel empty at first. Your mind keeps waiting for the next correction, the next moment you'll need to explain yourself. But nothing came. And slowly I learned how to sit in that quiet without filling it with guilt. That was new. I started noticing how my body responded to honesty, how tension eased when I stopped performing, how my breath felt deeper when I didn't rehearse conversations in my head. I realized how much energy I had spent managing perception, trying to be understood, trying to be acceptable. Letting that go wasn't instant. It came in layers. Each time I chose honesty over habit, something inside me settled. Not perfectly, but enough. And that was progress. I'm often asked if I regret changing so quietly, if I wish I had explained myself more. The truth is, quiet change protected me. It allowed growth without confrontation, healing without spectacle, truth without pressure. Some people will never understand choices they didn't have to make, and that's okay. Understanding isn't required for peace. Respect for yourself is. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this: you don't owe your healing to anyone else. You don't have to narrate your growth. You don't have to justify your boundaries, and you don't have to stay the same to be loved. Quiet change isn't weakness. It's wisdom. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose a life that feels true, even when no one is watching. That's how I moved forward, not loudly, not publicly, but honestly.